Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this online seminar. I'm James Tickell from Campbell Tickell, and I'm just going to introduce our proceedings before I hand over to Tracey McEachran, who is one of our associates who has played a major part in the development and indeed the implementation of the CultureScan. And I think we're all becoming far more aware of the critical importance of organisational culture. I think some years ago, probably people wouldn't have known what you meant by the term. And then it became something that would be a nice to have. And I think people now regard it as pretty much mission critical. If an organisation doesn't have a positive culture, then it lays itself open to all sorts of problems. And I don't want to be a doomster, but I thought I would start off by reminding us of some of the things that can go wrong in organizations if the culture is negative. And I think the one that springs to mind first is rudeness to customers, neglect of their needs. When customers complain about something, thinking, well, what are they complaining about? They're so lucky to have a home. Why can't they just keep quiet? Or being defensive when people ring up with a problem. And I think what we've seen recently is that that kind of behavior leads very directly to problems with the ombudsman, maladministration cases, issues with the regulator, and so on. So although regulation isn't the be all and end all, actually a negative culture can create those problems. So what else do we see? Well, I think in an organisation with negative culture, and we've probably all worked in them at some stage in our careers, you see jobs worth. You see people who say, oh no, sorry mate, that's not my problem. It's that lot over there, buck passing. And perhaps in fairness to some people, they would be avoiding responsibility in fear of being blamed. And we've all heard the phrase blame culture. And all of that leads on to silo working, different teams doing different things, and perhaps being hostile to each other, that lack of trust between colleagues. And I think one thing we see sometimes is a particular lack of trust at the front line in senior colleagues, the kind of them upstairs kind of culture. And it gets worse. Sometimes you find that there are major issues in an organization that everybody knew about. They all knew it was dodgy, but actually it's never discussed or mentioned. That ability to kind of ignore the obvious. We see things like if there's a culture that's sloppy, people can cut the corners on data entry, leading to the fact that data lacks integrity. Certain kinds of behaviors online can lay an organization open to cyber attacks. I think we all have to be doubly vigilant about cyber attacks at the moment. And then down at the front line, you can see a negative culture perhaps among repairs teams, which I've experienced, botched jobs, wasteful practices, and you might sum that up as no stitch in time to save nine. For the whole organisation, there might be poor staff satisfaction, might be harder to retain staff, recruit staff, and sometimes you get a lot of disciplinaries and grievances. You might find that there is a level of cynicism about the organisation's stated values. And of course, you would find then that external partners, regulators, local authorities, contractors might share those negative connotations. So I think I'm convinced that a really positive organisational culture is now absolutely mission critical to success. And that's what we're going to hear about today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Tracey, who is going to manage today's event. Before I do that, though, I'll just say we are recording the webinar and it will be made available along with the PDF of the slides. As is normally the case in these seminars, the chat function is turned off. So you need to use the question and answer function, and I would encourage you to do so. And if somebody else asks a question that you think is important, you can upvote it. Participants are all on mute, I'm afraid, and we can't see them on the video. and I will reassure you that we will do our very best to answer all of the questions, but we don't give you a cast iron guarantee that we will do so. So without further ado, Tracey, it's over to you.
Thank you, James. And as James said, that I do a lot of the work with Campbell Tickell around the CultureScan and looking at organisational culture. We've got two other people on with us today. We have Martina Smith, who's the CEO from HALE, Housing Association for Integrated Living. Martina is based in, and HALE are in Dublin. And they've undertaken the CultureScan as a part of a bigger piece of work. So Martina will talk us through that. And then we've got Francesca Stanyer, who's on with us, and she's our policy and research manager, who works on all the analytical elements of our CultureScan, and also with me we run the focus groups that go with or complement the survey that we send out to staff and colleagues. But before we start, I've just got a question that we're going to put in for you to answer, really to get your minds focused on where you're at in understanding the culture within your organisation. So hopefully we can launch that question. Here we go. How confident are you that your company culture can deliver the change that is needed? So not at all through to very confident. So if you could just answer that, thinking of that question. We'll just give you a minute or two to answer that. Okay. Thank you. So we have, so hopefully you can all see the results. So there's a few on the call that are not confident. Most were in the fairly confident bracket, I think, which is great. And obviously it's an interesting subject, culture. It's quite a big topic, and very often we know what's going on within our organisation, but there may be different cultures across an organisation, so you haven't got just one culture. And certainly the bigger the organisation, the more likely that is that you'll have pockets and different departments or teams that have slightly different cultures. But it is the thing that really drives the organisation's success, we believe. So on that note, I will hand over to Martina. So if you would like to take it from here, Martina.
Thank you, Tracey, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. So I'm the CEO of Housing Association for Integrated Living, and currently based in Dublin. Just on the next slide there's a little bit about us for people that don't know us. So we're an approved housing body, providing housing and mental health tenancy sustainment services to our own tenants, but also to other tenancies we get referred in from local authorities, other AHBs. We're a growth organisation, so we have a new strategic plan that's very ambitious in terms of growing our stock and also our mental health services. We have over 470 homes at the moment, and we plan to increase that by 60% in the next 5 years. And on average, over the last number of years, we've supported nearly 600 people each year. And that's predominantly those with significant and enduring mental health difficulties. We've also expanded our mental health tenancy sustainment services into 16 local authority areas in the last couple of years. So that was a big change for the organisation, and trying to reach out into more communities across Ireland. And as part of our wider strategic review last year, we we thought about doing a culture review, and I suppose this has set out really why we thought about it and why we thought it was important. We felt it was important to define our culture. We were aware that Hale has some really positive elements and still has, that we don't want to lose as we grow, because we are growing quite quickly. We'd increased our staff by over 70% to 2023, with now over 50 staff. And we also have a peer support programme with 22 peer support volunteers in the team, and they're growing all the time, and we have plans also to grow that team. And as always, we're a mental health organisation providing mental health support to our tenants, but we also need to ensure that the mental health and well-being of our staff is looked after as well. We found that culture was becoming more important, not only to our current staff, but also future candidates. And definitely there was more and more questions on culture coming up at interview stage, and that was really exemplified, I think, since COVID, with a lot more people asking that question and choosing to work in Hale. All that work also helped to underpin our new purpose, vision and values, in particular our values of the organisation, and also the new strategic plan, because staff, as we're all aware, are integral to the delivery of that strategic plan. And we also felt that we could look for improvements within the organisation, and also if there's any good practice out there or good advice that we might get from the CultureScan itself. We didn't want to do just another staff survey that sort of goes nowhere, that's done and sits on a shelf somewhere. So we really wanted it, to have some real organisational insight. So what we did, we commissioned Campbell Tickell to carry out their CultureScan. We took a whole organisation approach. So we invited our board, staff and our peer support volunteers all to be involved. It was led out by the leadership team and discussed very early on with staff, letting them know why we were doing it, and the importance of it to the leadership and to the whole organisation. The survey went to everybody, board, staff and peers, and we got 100% return from staff. The survey results were analysed and areas were identified for further discussion at the focus groups. So I think that was an important addition to the staff survey, is that we were given the opportunity there at focus groups to actually bottom out any issues that might have been raised. The focus groups themselves were a selection of staff from different teams, gender, age, etc. And some of our directors and volunteers, and that was led out by Kathleen and Tracey there from the Campbell Tickell team. And feedback from the whole process was that staff really appreciated that full involvement. The results and outcomes were very positive overall, and for Hale, it set out our key strengths and how it feels every day to work for Hale. So we were delighted to see that our employees felt safe, cared for, and that they really felt that they were making a difference in the world. And I think that's important in terms of, just on the bullet point there as well, that we're a client-focused organisation throughout our work, and that is important to staff as well, and that's why they're choosing to work in this environment. The results also indicated that staff within Hale perceive it as a place where teamwork is encouraged, and the atmosphere within the organisation is friendly and respectful. And the feedback was that there was strong leadership and good engagement with staff. And on the next slide, you can just see that's a little summary there that we put together. And one of the advantages of having all of that good feedback is that we can now promote that and promote Hale as an organisation to work. And we use this now on social media, on our new recruitment packs. So that's just to show you some of the the indicators there as well. And of course, on the next slide there, you'll see that we had learnings, and there were some areas of focus that came out of the CultureScan itself. And, some of our staff feeling overstretched, which, in the environment that we work in, with limited resources and service level agreements with HSE, and that can be the case. So we need to be just mindful of as leadership in our discussions with HSE around that. There were lower scores for agile and progressive. So that might suggest the organisation can be slow or reluctant to change. So that was something else that we noted in terms of, I think that really came as well from our extended leadership team, and something that we're working on now with the team to make sure that we can move with the times. Respondents viewed the organisation as being risk averse. And there's parts of the organisation we are quite risk averse in the health and safety of our staff, but there's other areas that probably we're not, and we need to really have a look at that throughout the organisation. Our growth ambitions may conflict with some perceptions of Hale's identity and our current culture as well. I think that comes around the fear of losing our culture as we grow. And then our meeting structures and agendas needed greater focus. Some of the feedback was that there was a lot of meetings and some meetings that should happen weren't happening. So all of that, was quite important that we got that feedback, and then that we actually put that into a plan. And on the next slide there we have just a list of the outcomes from the CultureScan itself. So the results were fully shared with the staff, and that's owned by all within the organisation. And that's not something we're going to drop now in 2024. It's going to be something that we continue to talk about through our staff meetings and our team meetings. The word of mouth is very important, and how our staff present to outside organisations at meetings, working with other organisations to try and assist our tenants. That's all really important. So the culture is very important for that. As a smaller organisation, we can't compete on salaries with some of the larger, more general needs organisations, but we feel now we definitely can in culture, and it's important for us now to use that information as part of our recruitment pack and as part of an attraction to work within Hale. We want to make sure that Hale remains a good place to work into the future, and as I said, there is a plan in place to do that, and that plan was agreed with staff and with the board. Staff inputted to that as part of the CultureScan and highlighted what they feel needs to be done to keep the positive, inclusive culture, and that's reviewed at staff meetings. So that really was what was important to them, was around communication. Having some time with the board as well was important. We have board away days, and also time out from work as I suppose as employees, but days away where we can bond together without having to discuss work were quite important. And new recruits now must also commit to the culture, and that's one of the key things for us, that we've defined our culture and that we expect anybody that comes into the organisation to work within that. And one of the key things then as well was that the first objective of our strategic plan is very much around people. And I feel the board took on board what came out of the CultureScan in terms of looking after our staff and looking after our tenants. So that's quite important. And just on the final slide there, it's just a summary of our purpose, vision and values, and these were reviewed as well as part of the wider strategic review. And I really feel that the CultureScan underpinned our values there in terms of trust and respect. And when we say leadership there, we don't mean having great leadership. We just see everybody in the organisation as leaders in what we do, and that's about empowerment and autonomy. So that's it from me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Martina. We've had some questions come in for you, so we'll hold those until we go to the question and answer session. So if we can now have Francesca, if you could. Lovely.
Oh, the lights have just gone off in the room, so apologies, it's a bit dark, but I hope they'll come back on. Hi everyone, really happy to be speaking here today. So as Tracey said, my name is Francesca Stanyer. I am the Policy and Research Manager at Campbell, Tickell, which means I head up our in-house research team who support across a wide range of CT's areas. But one of the main areas in which I work is with insight and culture, particularly with the CT CultureScan. So I'm really passionate about that link between organisational culture, customer satisfaction and overall success. I'm going to talk a little bit around how a culture scan can help in an organisation's understanding of what their culture currently is and how this might help or indeed hinder change. So I want to start with a statistic. According to research that was done by Deloitte, 83% of executives and 84% of employees ranked having engaged and motivated colleagues as the top factor that contributes to a company's success. That is really big numbers when you're viewing the experience of colleagues and the impact that can have on your ability for your organisation to move forward. At a time where there's so many sectors that are needing to adapt and change in order to meet demanding pressures, having a strong culture is clearly an area that organisations cannot skimp out on. But I guess it's the age-old question, how do you really know what your culture is? Or how do you talk about it and bring it into something that's actually able to be measured or spoken about in a way that you can start to see how agile you are or how progressive you are, especially in a turbulent world where so many different demands are always incoming. Now, the next slide, please. Oh, and there come the lights as well, that's good. So one way which we understand you can do this is through carrying out a scan of your organisation. So culture is not monolith. It consists of various subcultures. So that can be from different departments, different teams within a department, or even geographic locations may have their own distinct cultures. For example, if you have any colleagues that work in your satellite teams, it's not uncommon for them to be in their own culture, separate to those that might be in your headquarters. Recognising the nuances is essential, therefore, for effective leadership and change management. A cultural scan involves assessing and understanding the existing organisational culture with the goal to identify these subcultures, values and priorities that influence how work is done within the organisation. So we at CT originally looked to see what tools were out there in order to do this. We found there wasn't really anything that quite met these needs, or they perhaps didn't appreciate the different sectors in which we work with. So we developed our own tool, which was based on various different psychological theories. So also looking at those in the individual, such as the big 5 personality traits, but also those around the business. And if I can have the next slide, please. So from that, we developed these 7 pillars, as you can see on the screen, or characteristics of great organisations. So these are all built on the positive characteristics of a diverse and inclusivity, which run through all 7, but rather than being defined as separate characteristic. And we see them as being really pivotal for an organisation to be able to be successful. I will say here, though, that is obviously not one size fits all. So an example might be a care home may need their needs and their priorities for their culture might be very different to that of the commercial development team. However, there's usually a common ground amongst all of these. We've also then identified their dark shadows or their corresponding negative or toxic characteristics, as you can then see. So what you have is these effectively working against one another. And obviously, the more you are towards the positive side of these scales, the more resilient your organisation would be. So as Martina said, how it works is we carry out a survey that goes to the entire organisation. And it's really important that it includes everyone, including board and any other teams that you may have. This is so you can really understand how your organisation is working and where those different viewpoints or experiences are. We then supplement this with focus groups to dive into those lived experiences further. What I think is really great about this tool is we're able to really see those different groups and subcultures at play. We're able to identify the areas in which there's higher levels of contentment, or perhaps lower levels of empowerment or agile, and different priorities that sometimes can end up competing against each other. The age-old one perhaps being that against finance and those delivering frontline services. By understanding these different subcultures, organisations are able to craft transformation strategies that resonate with each group, because it allows them to be able to tailor communication strategies better, anticipate resistance and address that proactively when designing transformation strategies, and also recognise, I think, and appreciate diverse cultures, which then fosters that collaborative environment. So to try and put this together back into a more of a real situation rather than just speaking about the theory, I'm going to use examples from various clients that we've worked with. However, I am going to combine them just to ensure their anonymity. So we've used the CultureScan in multiple cases where there's been a series of changes in an organisation. So this may be through change in leadership, having quite a few interims in place, moving to new ways of working, or developing new target operating models to improve service delivery. What we found across all of these cases was a difference in experience of how this change has landed or been communicated. In each case, there was a lack of communication and explanation as the reasons why the change had happened. Now, this probably seems like quite an obvious example to perhaps demonstrate why there might be lower contentment scores. But what I don't think was appreciated was that effect of being able to successfully introduce new changes on that. So to be agile and continually evolve. We found that perhaps be a specific smaller issue that was almost then symbolic of a larger issue, where everyone's emotional frustration was being focused into something as a symbol of change. So to come up with an example, I guess, in other words, the frustration of having to pay for coffee was actually suddenly now a frustration of the lack of understanding why that change had happened. Also, from having this scan, the organisations in which we've worked with have really been able to see where those biggest areas of unease are and see how that was impacting their ability to bring in new initiatives, such as embracing new technology for efficient ways of working, or needing for more cross-team collaboration. We often hear about all these really great technological transformation programs, but they're often implemented looking quite top level and not necessarily appreciating how the procedures are playing out in real life, or bringing those that carry out them on the journey with them. Again, this might seem like quite an obvious case study. However, it's actually really hard to pick up on this type of stuff without having that landscape scan and giving colleagues the opportunities to share their views in a way that can be quantifiably measured. Can I have the next slide, please? So just to finish then, resistance to change is normal and resistance to change is unavoidable. However, carrying out a culture scan can help leaders understand with greater insight and anticipate challenges, allowing them to address these through target strategies and communication. It helps them understand the different subcultures and priorities at play and how these work with or against the main priority for the business, through giving really tangible evidence and data in order to do so. And I think or would argue that by recognising and respecting the diversity within an organisation, you can encourage a more adaptive, resilient and innovative approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. So we've already got some questions in. So I'm going to look at those questions and ask our guests. So I don't know if Martina and James can come back on. That would be lovely. It's from Joe Seedley Burke. Did you see a difference in cultural attitude for non-client facing staff? So anyone in your organisation, she says here, particularly property management or development staff, if you have any. So was there a difference between those customer facing and non-customer facing?
I think the one of the difference we saw is the more senior you went in the organisation, the happier you were, which was one of the things that we picked out. And I think the housing staff were a little bit less happy than our support services staff. And I think that's the nature of the role that they're doing as well, where support is very hands-on, keep the tenant in their tenancy, whereas housing can be very much focused on, pay your rent, get the repairs done, would probably deal with more complaints on that side. we spend quite a bit of time as well with our corporate services team to make sure that that they're thanked a lot for the work that they do, because they're very front facing and provide a fundamental job. So it's key to us to ensure that everybody in the organisation can see where their role is and how important that role is. And we do need to spend, and have been spending, a little bit more time maybe with the teams that felt a little bit more, I suppose, not as happy. But there is a difference within the organisation, definitely, and that's why it's good sometimes to open your eyes to that. When you say that Hale's a great place to work, or that it is for everybody and not just sort of hands-on. I hope that answers that.
Thank you, Martina. Did you want to build on that, James?
Well, I thought I would just quickly say that it very often comes out in a culture scan that different parts of the organisation have very different cultures. So particularly it's the difference between the kind of head office support staff and the kind of more operational staff. That often comes out very strongly. We also find actually that there can be differences in perceptions between people who've joined recently, who tend to be very contented, people who've been there kind of a medium or a longer length of time, who may have quite different results. So I think that, what comes out often from a culture scan is that the leadership and the boards want to have one culture across the whole organisation, not a series of separate subcultures that may be quite different. And that is the challenge, actually, that people are often left with after they've digested the results for CultureScan.
Thank you, James. And we had a question come in beforehand from Jan Hutchinson. So I think this links in a way. She's asked us that they like to celebrate success within their organisation. And it's easier to celebrate success when people have got targets and you can reward people, or it's really clear that they've achieved something. So she's asking around, how do you celebrate success or have recognition beyond the everyday for those that are more that don't have those clear targets, that are maybe more backroom type staff, if I can put it that way. For me, I think there is, if you have values, which most of us have, that if you reward or recognize people for behaving in a way that reflects your values in a positive way, it makes no difference whether they're customer facing or they're fundraising. Actually, if you reward people for living the values, then you can do that no matter what department they work in. That would be and that was a question that came in before the webinar, so you won't see that on your screens. Anything to add to that, James or Martina or Francesca?
I think what we are doing this year is managers are sending an email to, I suppose, the leadership team and highlighting if somebody's sort of gone above and beyond, and I think that's important in terms of pulling people out from the different teams. And, I'll send an email saying, thank you for your work. And I know it's easier in a smaller organisation because we meet people every day, but we're still dealing with a lot of people online and that. So it is important that staff understand the work that they do. And at each of our staff quarterly meeting, we have somebody from each team stands up and tells exactly what they've done that quarter. And it might only be a quick summary, but it does underpin their importance to the organisation as well from all parts.
Lovely, thank you. James, did you want to say something?
Well, when I became a chief executive quite a long time ago, another more experienced chief executive put his arm around my shoulder and he said, James, I have one piece of advice for you. You can never be too cheesy. And although I didn't quite agree with his phrasing, what he was saying was that actually organizations need to celebrate success. They need to find opportunities to reinforce the values, to praise those who have done well, often in just sort of, not necessarily in jobs that are about development or reaching big targets, but customer service and so on. And I think that, the other thing I would say is that the most powerful determinant of an organization's culture is the day-to-day behavior of the senior team. That is what kind of leads the culture, creates it, and defines it. So when people think about how to create that positive culture that celebrates success, it's actually about the behavior of the senior team and the example that they set.
Thank you. So another question, with the rise of remote work and virtual teams, how has organizational culture been impacted, and what strategies can companies employ to maintain a strong and cohesive culture in a distributed workforce? And that's from Honey, who I know very well. Sorry, Honey, Primel. So, I mean, I think Francesca and I may be able to say a little bit about this. It definitely has impacted on culture. There's no doubt about that. Since we've been doing the CultureScan, and the further we get away from the pandemic, actually the less I'm sensing there is a divide with the remote working. The biggest divide is the board. Quite often the board now with remote meetings are not coming into the organisations, they're not seeing colleagues, and I'd say that is still quite a big impact on the board's understanding of the colleagues' experience. So I think that's still quite a big gap. So Francesca, anything you could add to that?
Yeah, I think the other bit I'd perhaps say that helps the gap is when people join the organisation, and that induction process of making sure they know who everyone is, but also everyone knows who they are and what they're here to do. So I've seen or advised people have a really look at that induction process when you're doing the virtual working, that people are really integrated to the organisation still.
Yeah, that's lovely. I think people are getting back into the office more. I think there is a real hybrid rather than remote, and that definitely helps. But I guess the other thing we've probably found, Francesca, is that if there is an issue around team to team dynamic, then working remotely, what it's done is make teams can be much stronger, actually, because they're able to access each other more. But then one team to another team, there might be a bit more of a gap. And I think, is that your understanding, Francesca, as well? Yeah. So therefore things like any training you do, bringing them people into the office to do that training if it's possible, having, Martina's already spoken about social events. I've worked with another organisation that's works in a completely different industry, and what they do, they're in different countries. They will come together 4 times a year and actually work on something physically together just 4 weeks of the year, and that really bonds us, bonds them as a team. So there are things that you can do to bring people together and really build on the culture. Hopefully that answers that question. James, did you want to say something there?
Well, I was just going to comment that one of the things that's come out in a few organisations is actually the communication overload that is the kind of consequence of some ways of remote working. So we worked for one organisation where it became apparent that I think that there were 1 million emails sent internally in a given month between a few hundred staff, which seemed to me absolutely astonishing. But if something was copied to 10 people, it did count as 10 emails. So I think that one of the challenges of remote working is actually not to create that kind of communication overload, as well as avoiding the isolation.
Lovely, thank you. So James Bryson's asked, as well as being able to identify how culture differs across teams and departments, are you also able to access how it differs across other characteristics, e.g. age? So Francesca, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, so the scan allows us to see across a load of different demographics. So we tend to obviously stick to those that are within the census, and it gives us a really good understanding of whether there's any other impact that happens within that. So yeah, we're able to see around age, able to see around length of service. We often tend to find that, again, I think we've spoken about those that recently joined the organisation tend to be a lot happier than those that perhaps been here a little bit longer. We're then kind of coming a bit more positive again towards people that have been with the organisation even longer. But yeah, we're really able to kind of delve down into what's happening. We obviously, though, do it, if we're having a look at anything, there also needs to be enough of a sample size for us to make any conclusions on it.
Thank you. So Debbie Green has asked, what reflections do panelists and the host have on understanding, preserving and evolving organisational culture during and after a merger? So I think what's really interesting, that's an interesting question, Debbie. I think that there's a lot of diligence around lots of aspects of merger, and probably not as much diligence as there could be on the aspects of culture when it comes to merger. So I think there's a lot of pre-work to do to understand what are you bringing together. In our sector, in housing, we are likely to have organisations that are friendly, where there's a deep need for belonging. And if you merge two organisations and it feels so disrupted that there isn't a sense of belonging, then that really does cause uneasiness within staff and our colleagues. And I guess the thing is, those first impressions that people have of what it feels like to be this new company do stick. If you can spend a lot of time and focus on understanding what you're bringing together, communicating that really well, making it as safe as possible, building psychological safety for that new organisation, for people coming into that new organisation, you're going to have a much better chance of that merger working well. My experience from 20 years in commercial was that I belonged to Cadbury's, we merged with Treble Bassett, and still 3 years after the merger, we were saying, are they Cadbury people or are they Treble people? So, there was this taken for granted that we would come together without the due diligence around the culture. So, James, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, I mean, we're not here today to advertise our services, but in a couple of cases, we've done culture scans separately of two merging organisations, kind of allowing them to identify areas of difference and perhaps more importantly, areas of similarity, so that they can have a kind of cultural change programme that goes as part of the integration of the two organisations. And I think sometimes people have been surprised actually at the extent of difference, and in others they've been pleasantly reassured by the amount of similarity. So I do think that paying real attention to culture, whether you do it in the way that we've described or in other ways, is really important, and actually giving people at all levels in the organisation that opportunity to talk about the culture they would like to see in the merged organisation can be really positive.
Thank you. So from Emma Honsum, I think it is, really pleased you touched on senior leadership heavily influencing culture. Have you any advice about influencing culture from middle management of frontline staff, particularly where there is a difference in leadership styles and expectations? It's quite interesting because I want to go to Martina with that one, because actually I feel that there is a lot of influence both ways within health. I know it's a smaller organisation, but I really think that was quite strong.
Yeah, I think, we expect the leadership team to sort of have the same leadership style, but we can't always. We're always going to be very different, and it's having that conversation as both one-to-one and as part of the leadership. But I'm a big fan of champions within the organisation, within the different teams, and that's important for change management. Is having somebody that will help you deliver that change and keep that culture. And I think it's important that, and when we talk about bringing in new staff, that they see that culture and that other staff lead that out and say, this is the culture and we're expecting you to come into this environment and work this way with us in a teamwork and friendly manner. And I think you can't do it without all of the staff being, I suppose, signed up to it. And I think in a smaller organisation as well, you could get one or two staff that could just change quite quickly how the culture is. And if you're a bigger organisation, that could be within teams, and then that could make it difficult for other teams to work with them. So it definitely is throughout the whole organisation. And I think the important thing for the leaders is to be aware of that. And that awareness sometimes you're only really going to get by doing surveys and by checking in with I suppose your champions as well, and people that can come to you in a trust environment where if they are raising something, that it is trust and that's confidential, and listening to that.
That's lovely. Thank you, Martina. I can think of an example. At one stage we had a certain level of middle managers that were scoring fairly low compared to certainly from the higher one, but you could, or the higher levels. But what you could see is the impact of that on the other levels of the organisation. So I think the good thing about the CultureScan, it can pick up where there is, where the message isn't getting through, or there is behaviour that in the organisation that is very different. So I think that was useful. Is there anything you could add to that, Francesca?
Yeah, I was going to say we've been able to kind of see if there's been that different leadership styles we've kind of spoken about. You can really see when that starts to play, when different departments are scoring differently, or different teams as well. And that recognition that we've discussed, those middle managers really are that bridge between having the kind of strategic and direction from exec being able to trickle down right down to that frontline service. So although they tend to be the ones that are perhaps less positive around the organisation, they're definitely the area of that focus and kind of cohesion is needed.
Thank you. So Hilary Knight has asked a question specifically to you, James, on your reflections on the evolution of the sector after over the last couple of decades, the mergers and economies of scale arguments versus people like me who increasingly come to have more confidence that an SME has better potential to cultivate positive organisational culture. So
great. And I know that Francesca's got something to say about this as well. I think I would counsel against any easy assumption that smaller organizations necessarily have more positive culture. I think in our work, we found that there can be smaller organizations that don't have a very positive culture, and larger ones where they've given it a lot of thought and attention, where broadly speaking, they do. I think what I would say is that it's probably harder work to create and sustain a positive culture right across a large organisation with a couple of thousand employees or whatever it might be. And it involves a lot of attention to internal communication, to creating forums, to making sure that there's visibility for the board and the senior team with people who've never met them, and so on. But I really don't think that large organisations necessarily have poor cultures. They just have to work harder to sustain it and create to make sure that every part of the organisation has that shared set of attitudes and behaviours, and that actually people can challenge behaviours or instances that seem to go against the values or against the culture. So it's harder work, Hilary, it definitely is. And I think that, community land trust or organisations that have a real local focus, they've got a lot going for them in terms of creating culture that the larger ones don't necessarily have. But even so, they're not doomed to have negative culture. They can create really positive cultures that are appropriate to their scale of operation.
Francesca?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think for the large organisation, it really comes back to having a really strong value framework. And as Tracey was mentioning earlier, being able to measure and kind of look for that kind of behaviours within people, which again, I think being able to have that across a bigger organisation, even there is perhaps different areas of the business that you're working towards and different priorities, you effectively all should be behaving in the same way and for that one kind of main mission. So again, as James said, it's perhaps easier to kind of have that within a smaller organisation, but it's definitely possible. And we've seen it in larger organisations as well.
Yeah, thank you. So just looking at the question. So another question, a question online was that we had before about any tips do you have for smaller organisations where culture may be more nuanced due to size? But I actually think, Martina, your example and everything you've shared with us probably answers that question. So hopefully the person that asked that question has felt it's been answered. And another one that came on is what other KPIs can be used to understand the culture within an organisation. So what other traditional suite of KPIs? I mean, I'd come back to what Francesca was saying around values. How clear are your values? Have you got too many? Honestly, if you've got 5 to 7 values, it's going to be really, really difficult for people to manage that and manage that and have a framework around them. So, I mean, I would be an advocate of having really clear values, and Martina had 3 really clear values for Hale that can be measured, that people can be rewarded against, and then can be lived across the whole organisation. It's also, you can say, with those values, are people coming in, are consultants coming in that we're bringing in, are they living to our values? And I think that is really important. So, yeah, and I think Martina said as well, is listening. You cannot be just having that time just to be an observer and to listen, and to, as a leader, encourage things like people bringing in and sharing lunch and just listening. You will be able to understand your culture if you're able to step back and not judge and just purely listen. So I think they're just some basic things you can do to really help you understand your culture. Does anybody else want to add anything to that before I ask another question?
I think I would just add, Tracey, is as well, if you're talking about more, I guess, KPIs for it rather than that sense of feeling that often culture tends to go with, is have a look at what you're measuring for your customers as well. That's so much you'll see what your colleagues are feeling is what your customers are also feeling. So having that almost mirror sometimes can be really helpful.
I think that's excellent. Yeah, point. Thank you. So have you had any staff asking to move to a 4-day working week for the same pay as 5-day? I think that's for you, Martina.
Yeah, it comes up quite a bit, and we keep an eye on it. It's quite difficult, I think, in when you've got such a different organisation providing different services. It is probably something we will trial at some stage, but we're waiting for somebody else to do it before us, which we probably shouldn't do. But I think we've recently brought in flexi time, which I think helps our staff, and they can build up time off and lieu and that. And I think that was a change in that right direction. But at the moment, our biggest discussion really with staff is around the hybrid working and formalising that. I suppose we've taken a route of not been overly formal about it, but as we grow, I think we are going to have to formalise that as well. And that'll be, I suppose, a change for some staff as well. I think there are some organisations that have trialled a 4-day week, and I think the feedback I've read that it's quite good at the beginning, but then it drops off. That if anybody who is listening is trialling it, let us know how you get on.
And it's I think it's having really clear objectives for people, and there's real clarity around that, and it's an open conversation around how it's working for them and how it's working for you, is really important, isn't it? Thank you. So we're gonna wrap up now, but I have got one more question. So let's see if we can honour this in the time we have. In the face of constant changes and reputational damage in the sector, how can organisations cultivate a resilient and adaptive culture that enables them to navigate through turbulent times? Which is, I finish with that because it's probably the thing that comes up the most as agile working, and being able to for us to deal with what comes our way in an agile way, so not a reactive way, not a chaotic, may I say, way, or what happens is all our attention goes on that, and we focus on that for a while, and all our attention goes on that. So it does come up the most, and structure is the thing that helps enormously with the ability to be agile and resilient, that you have good structures, good governance, good systems in place. Francesca?
Yeah, it would be just to echo that, the importance, I think, of having that good structure in place, policies and procedures that people know as well. I think that's something we often come up to, that policies may be in place, but either they're not working or they're just not known and therefore not happening. And that does, we see it so often, affects the organisations' ability to be more agile and be more proactive and see things coming, because that safety almost isn't there. So they're starting from an area of uneasiness.
And I'm going to add to that, a really good man management skills. that would make a huge difference. So training for your people that are managing people. So James, would you like to finish that one?
I was going to focus on one thing, which is a resilient culture is one in which individuals are resilient.
Mm-hmm.
It's about an organisation which is aware of neurodiversity within its workforce and supports it. It's about an organisation that picks up if colleagues are having a hard time and maybe having mental health issues or family issues or poverty issues. It's one aspect of this, but I think it's a really important one that is sometimes neglected. It's just creating that personal resilience of the people who work for the organisation and being actually far more aware of their very particular needs.
And that's no mean feat.
It sure isn't.
So thank you for that. So we'll come to a close now. We've got a minute till we finish. I think I've been asked to say that we're going to post the survey in the chat. So I hope some magic will happen. And so it just leaves me to thank everybody so that's on the session. So thank you so much, Martina, for coming and sharing your experience.
Thank you.
And Francesca, for your presence today and your wisdom.
Thank you.
And to James, and thank you for all of you that have joined us. If you have any questions at all, just please get in touch. We're more than happy just to answer questions or help you think about your culture and your organisation. James, do you want to say anything to finish us off?
Well, I think I better thank you, Tracey, for guiding us through the discussion. I think it's gone very well, so thank you for that. And you'll see in the chat, everybody, that we're able to give feedback on the seminar, on the webinar, and we hope that you will. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Tracey. Thank you, Martina and Francesca, and hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks. Bye.